The abandoned research station sat silent on the dark side of HFY, its metal walls covered in a thick layer of space dust. Thomas Reed adjusted his helmet's lights as he made his way through the empty corridors, his boots echoing against the metal floor. As a veteran space ranger, he had explored countless abandoned stations, but something about this one felt different. "Control, this is Reed. Still no signs of the research team," he reported through his comm unit. "Place looks like it was abandoned in a hurry." His flashlight beam caught scattered papers and overturned chairs, telling a story of panic and rushed escape. The response came back crackling through static. "Copy that. Reed. Complete your sweep and get out. Something took out an entire research team. We don't want to lose you too." Thomas moved deeper into the station, checking each room methodically. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow, creating dancing shadows in corners and doorways. His handheld scanner showed no signs of life, yet his instincts told him he wasn't alone. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the empty station. A low, pained growl that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Following the sound, Thomas found himself at the entrance to the station's main lab. The reinforced door had been torn open from the inside, its metal frame twisted like paper. His training told him to turn back, to call for backup, but curiosity pushed him forward. The lab was a mess of broken equipment and shattered glass. In the center, trapped under a fallen piece of machinery, lay a creature that made Thomas's breath catch in his throat. Even injured, it was magnificent and terrifying. The creature was easily twice his size, its body covered in scales that seemed to absorb light. 2 rows of spines ran down its back, and its clawed hands could easily tear through steel. Thomas recognized it immediately from his training briefings. A nightshade, the galaxy's most feared predator. But something was wrong with this picture. The nightshade wasn't attacking. Instead, it was trying to free itself, movements weak and uncoordinated. Dark fluid, probably blood, pulled beneath it. "Control," Thomas whispered. "I found a nightshade." The response was immediate and harsh. "Pull back immediately. We're sending in the elimination team. These things have wiped out entire colonies." Thomas's hand moved to his weapon, but he hesitated. The creature's eyes met his, deep, intelligent eyes that glowed with an inner light. There was pain there, yes, but also something else. Understanding. Fear. The nightshade made no move to attack. Instead, it let out another pain sound and tried to shift away from him, only causing itself more pain. "Delay that elimination team," Thomas said suddenly, surprising himself. "This one's injured. It's not attacking." "Reed, have you lost your mind? Protocol is clear. All nightshades are to be eliminated on sight. They're nothing but killing machines." But Thomas wasn't listening anymore. He had noticed something else: restraints and medical equipment scattered around the lab. This nightshade hadn't attacked the station. It had been a prisoner here, a test subject. Slowly, carefully, Thomas holstered his weapon. The creature watched his every move, its breathing labored but steady. "Hey there, big fellow," Thomas said softly, knowing his voice wouldn't carry through his helmet, but hoping his body language would convey his intentions. "Let's get you out of there." The nightshade's eyes widened slightly, its head tilting in what looked remarkably like confusion. "Reed, do not engage." "That's an order." Thomas reached up and switched off his comm unit. He knew he was probably throwing away his career, maybe even his life, but something deep in his gut told him this was right. This creature wasn't the mindless killer everyone believed it to be. As he carefully approached the trapped nightshade, Thomas Reed made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He didn't know it yet, but in this moment, on this abandoned station, human compassion would begin to unravel centuries of fear and misunderstanding. The nightshade watched him approach, and for the first time in recorded history, one of the galaxy's deadliest predators chose not to kill. Thomas worked quickly, his hands steady despite the risk. The fallen machinery pinning the nightshade was heavy, But years of Space Ranger training had prepared him for situations requiring both strength and careful thinking. He activated his suit's power assist and began lifting the metal beam. "Easy now," he muttered, more to himself than the creature. The nightshade remained still, its luminous eyes fixed on him, with an intensity that made him wonder if it understood more than anyone had ever suspected. As the beam lifted, the creature pulled itself free with surprising grace despite its injuries. Thomas expected it to flee or attack once freed, but instead it stayed where it was, watching him. Dark blood still oozed from several wounds on its side. His medical scanner beeped as he ran it over the nightshade's body. The readings made his blood run cold. Someone had been conducting experiments on this creature. Surgical scars crisscrossed its hide, and there were traces of various drugs in its system. "They weren't studying you," Thomas said aloud, anger rising in his chest. "They were torturing you." The nightshade made a soft clicking sound, its head tilting slightly. Then, to Thomas's amazement, it slowly extended one massive clawed hand toward him. The gesture seemed almost grateful. A loud bang echoed through the station, making both of them jump. The elimination team had arrived. "We need to move," Thomas said, looking around frantically. His eyes fell on the emergency evacuation pods. It was crazy, but it might be their only chance. "Can you walk?" As if understanding, the nightshade rose to its full height. It swayed slightly but remained standing. Thomas noticed it was deliberately keeping its claws turned away from him, a clear sign of non-aggression. "Read." A voice boomed through the station's comm system. "This is Commander Wilson. Exit the station immediately. We have orders to purge the entire facility." Thomas led the way to the evacuation bay, the nightshade following close behind. Every few steps, he glanced back, still unable to believe he was helping the very creature he'd been trained to fear and destroy. They reached the pods just as the first explosions rocked the station. The elimination team was using standard purge protocol. Destroy everything. Leave no evidence. The pod was designed for one person, but the nightshade somehow managed to fold its massive body inside. Thomas squeezed in after it, finding himself pressed against scales that felt surprisingly warm and smooth. "Hope you don't mind close quarters," he said, punching in the launch sequence. The pod shot away from the station, just as larger explosions began tearing it apart. As they drifted in space, Thomas finally had a moment to question his own sanity. He had just thrown away his career, violated dozens of protocols, and was now sharing an escape pod with the galaxy's most feared predator. The nightshade shifted slightly, and Thomas felt something brush against his mind. A gentle presence, like a whisper. He froze, remembering old stories about nightshades having telepathic abilities. Stories that had been dismissed as fantasy. Images flowed into his mind. The research station, scientists in protective suits, pain, confusion, loneliness. The nightshade was sharing its memories. "They kept you prisoner," Thomas said softly. "Treated you like an animal." He felt a wave of confirmation from the creature. The pod's emergency beacon was blinking, but Thomas knew he couldn't activate it. Right now, they would both be considered targets. "I suppose we're in this together now," he said, checking the pod's supplies. "I'm Thomas. Don't suppose you have a name?" The nightshade's eyes seemed to shimmer, and another image touched Thomas's mind. Darkness moving like silk, a shadow dancing in starlight. "Shadow," Thomas said, understanding. "That's what I'll call you." The pod's small window showed the research station collapsing in on itself, burning bright against the void of space. As they drifted away from the destruction, Thomas realized that there was no going back. He had chosen his path. Inside the cramped pod, human and nightshade, sworn enemies according to every official record, began their journey as unlikely allies. Neither knew that their escape would spark a chain of events that would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about both species. 3 days in an emergency shelter on a remote mining moon had given Thomas plenty of time to study his unusual companion. Shadow moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large, and despite being injured, displayed remarkable intelligence in helping them stay hidden. The shelter was little more than an abandoned storage unit, but it served their needs. Thomas had managed to trade his spare equipment for medical supplies at a local black market, no questions asked. Now he watched as Shadow carefully arranged their limited resources, sorting them by importance. "You're not just smart," Thomas said, observing Shadow use tools with surprising precision. "You're civilized." Shadow's eyes gleamed, and another mental image touched Thomas's mind. This time, he saw vast cities unlike anything humans had built, structures that seemed to grow from the ground itself, filled with creatures like Shadow. The vision carried a deep sense of loss. "Your people, you had a whole civilization?" Thomas asked, stunned. What happened to it? The images that followed were dark and chaotic. Fear, misunderstanding, warfare, other species attacking, driven by terror of the Nightshade's appearance and abilities. Shadow's kind had been forced to scatter, to hide, to become the very monsters they were feared to be. "We got it all wrong," Thomas muttered, shaking his head. "The galaxy's been hunting you based on lies." Shadow moved closer, its massive form casting a gentle shadow over Thomas. Despite their short time together, Thomas no longer felt any fear. The creature lowered its head, bringing its eyes level with Thomas. The mental connection between them had grown stronger each day. Suddenly, Shadow tensed. A moment later, Thomas heard it too, voices approaching their shelter. They pressed themselves against the back wall, Shadow instinctively positioning itself between Thomas and the entrance. "Swear, I saw something big move in here yesterday," a rough voice said outside. "Probably just mining equipment," another voice answered. "This whole moon's full of abandoned junk." The voices passed, but the danger remained clear. They couldn't stay here much longer. Thomas pulled out his tablet, showing Shadow a map of nearby systems. "We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere we can learn more about your history." Shadow's claw gently touched the screen, pointing to a system Thomas had never heard of. Another vision filled his mind. Ancient ruins on a distant world, hidden knowledge waiting to be discovered. "Your people left records?" Thomas asked excitedly. Shadow confirmed with a gentle mental touch. As they planned their next move, Thomas noticed Shadow attempting to mimic his hand gestures. The creature was learning, adapting, trying to bridge the communication gap between them. It was far from the mindless killer described in military briefings. Thomas pulled up an old report about Nightshade encounters on his tablet. "Look at this. Every official record paints your kind as savage beasts, but that's not what I'm seeing." Shadow's response was a complex mixture of emotions: sadness, frustration, and a deep desire to be understood. The creature carefully picked up Thomas's water container, unscrewed the cap with its claws, and offered it to him with a gentleness that defied its fearsome appearance. "You're trying to show me," Thomas realized. "Every little action is you proving what your kind really is." A warm feeling of approval flowed from Shadow. The creature then did something unexpected. It began tracing patterns on the dusty floor. Thomas watched in amazement as complex symbols took shape. "You have written language," he breathed. "Shadow, this changes everything. If we can prove your intelligence, your civilization." But Shadow's next mental image was a warning, showing others of its kind who had tried to reveal themselves, only to be met with violence and fear. The message was clear. The galaxy wasn't ready for the truth. "Then we'll make them ready," Thomas said firmly. "We just need to be smart about it." As night fell on the mining moon, Human and Nightshade continued their careful dance of communication and understanding. Each new revelation built a stronger bridge between them, proving that the greatest barriers in the galaxy weren't physical, but those built by fear and ignorance. The cargo ship's engine hummed softly as Thomas checked their course for the third time. They had traded in the cramped mining moon for the vast expanse of space, but their problems had only grown. News of a rogue space ranger harboring a nightshade had spread quickly through official channels. Shadow stood at the viewport, its massive form reflected in the reinforced glass. The creature had healed well over the past week, its natural regenerative ability surprising even Thomas. A slight movement caught Thomas's attention. Shadow was tracking something outside the ship. "Company?" Thomas asked, already moving to the controls. The mental image that hit him was sharp and clear. 3 pursuit vessels, trying to remain hidden in the asteroid field they were passing. Shadow's senses were far superior to both human and ship technology. "Good catch," Thomas said, banking the ship hard to port. "Let's see how they like the dense part of the field." What followed was a dance through space that proved just how well human and nightshade could work together. Shadow projected mental warnings of incoming dangers while Thomas piloted, their combined abilities making the bulky cargo ship move like a fighter craft. "Warning shots," Thomas announced as energy beams lit up the space around them. "They want us alive." Shadow's response was a mix of images showing various hiding spots among the asteroids. Thomas grinned, understanding the plan. They didn't need to outrun their pursuers. They just needed to outsmart them. The cargo ship dove into a narrow gap between 2 massive rocks. Thomas cut power to all non-essential systems, letting them drift. Shadow's natural ability to absorb light made the viewports appear empty to any outside observers. "Targets lost." A voice crackled over the emergency channel. "Spread out and search pattern Delta." Thomas watched the pursuit ships split up, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. None of them thought to look in the too narrow gap where no ship should logically fit. But their victory was short-lived. A new ship appeared on the edge of their sensors, much larger than the pursuit vessels. The mental image from Shadow carried a sense of recognition and dread. "A bounty hunter," Thomas whispered. Shadow's confirmation came with more detail. This hunter was notorious among nightshades, known for tracking down and capturing several of Shadow's kind for private collectors and research facilities. The massive ship's scanners were far more advanced than the military vessels. They couldn't hide for long. "We can't outrun that ship," Thomas said, studying their options. "But maybe we don't have to." Shadow tilted its head, curious. Thomas pulled up the cargo manifest on his screen. "This ship was carrying mining explosives," he explained. "We could use them to trigger a chain reaction in the asteroid field. Create enough chaos to slip away." The plan was risky, but Shadow's next mental image showed full support, along with some suggestions for improvement. The Nightshade's understanding of space physics was impressive. They worked quickly, Shadow's strength and Thomas's technical skills combining to modify the explosives. The bounty hunter's ship drew closer, its presence becoming harder to ignore. "Ready?" Thomas asked, hand on the launch controls. Shadow's mental touch was steady and sure. They launched their modified explosives at carefully calculated points in the asteroid field. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the first explosion triggered a cascade of reactions. Asteroids began colliding, creating a spreading wave of chaos. The bounty hunter's ship fired a tractor beam, trying to lock onto them through the debris. But Shadow had anticipated this, using its natural energy-absorbing abilities to disrupt the beam's focus. Now, Thomas gunned the engines, using the explosion's shockwave to boost their speed. They shot through a narrow gap in the expanding debris field, while their pursuers were forced to pull back or risk destruction. As they emerged from the asteroid field, Thomas allowed himself a small laugh. Not bad for a supposedly mindless beast and a disgraced ranger, huh? Shadow's amusement flowed through their mental link, along with images of their pursuers' frustration. But there was also concern. Their escape would only make others hunt them more aggressively. "Let them come," Thomas said firmly. "We make a pretty good team." They set course for deeper space, leaving the chaos of the asteroid field behind. Each encounter taught them more about working together, proving that the combination of human ingenuity and nightshade abilities was something the galaxy had never seen before. and wasn't ready for. The ancient ruins rose before them like silent guardians, their dark surfaces absorbing the light of the binary stars overhead. Thomas and Shadow had finally reached their destination, a forgotten world that held secrets about the Nightshade's past. "No wonder no one found this place," Thomas said, checking his suit's readings. "The whole planet's magnetic field scrambles standard scanners." He watched as Shadow moved with reverence through the ruins, its claws gently tracing patterns on weathered walls. Suddenly, Shadow froze. Through their mental link, Thomas felt a surge of recognition. The Nightshade led him to a massive doorway covered in symbols similar to those Shadow had drawn in the dust of the mining moon. "Can you read it?" Thomas asked, recording everything with his suit's cameras. The answer came in a flood of images. Thomas saw the Nightshades as they once were, peaceful guardians of order in the galaxy, using their natural abilities to maintain balance between species. They had been diplomats, healers, and protectors. Shadow pressed its claws into specific points around the doorway. With a grinding sound that echoed through the empty ruins, the massive door began to open. Inside, they found what looked like a control room. Ancient technology hummed to life at Shadow's touch, projecting holographic images that filled the chamber. Thomas watched in awe as the true history of the Nightshades unfolded before him. "They were afraid of your power," Thomas said softly, understanding dawning as he watched records of the first conflicts. "Other species saw your abilities and assumed you'd use them for conquest." Shadow's mental touch carried deep sorrow. The images showed how fear had led to preemptive attacks against the Nightshades. Rather than fight back and prove their attackers right, most Nightshades had chosen to retreat, to hide, to let themselves be seen as monsters if it meant avoiding a galaxy-wide war. But there was more. Shadow activated another series of controls, revealing a hidden truth that made Thomas's blood run cold. Certain powerful figures in the galaxy had known the truth all along. They had deliberately spread fear of the Nightshades to keep them isolated and vulnerable. "The research stations, the hunters," Thomas said, his voice tight with anger. "They want to study you, to learn how to use your abilities for themselves." A new sound echoed through the ruins. Footsteps. They weren't alone. "Quite right, Ranger Reed," a smooth voice said from the entrance. "Though I'm surprised you figured it out so quickly." Thomas spun around to face Director Wells of the Galactic Research Institute, flanked by heavily armed guards. Shadow moved to stand beside Thomas, its massive form radiating protective energy. "The Nightshade's abilities could revolutionize everything," Wells continued, stepping into the chamber. "Imagine soldiers who could absorb energy weapons, ships with living hulls that could heal themselves, telepathic communication across light years." "They're not your lab rats," Thomas growled. "They're a civilization." "They're the greatest scientific discovery in history," Wells corrected. "And you've led us right to their ancestral records. Thank you for that, by the way." Shadow's mental touch carried an urgent warning. More forces were surrounding the ruins. But there was also determination. Through their link, Thomas saw Shadow's plan. "You know what your problem is, Director," Thomas said, subtly shifting his position. "You think you understand everything about Nightshades." "I've studied them for 20 years, Wells replied confidently. "Then you should know," Thomas said with a grim smile, "that they can do this." Shadow released a pulse of energy that its kind normally used for communication. But here, in this ancient place built by its people, the pulse activated something else. The ruins' technology responded, creating a cascade effect that overwhelmed every piece of modern equipment in range. In the chaos that followed, as weapons failed and communications went dark, Thomas and Shadow accessed the central controls. They wouldn't just escape, they would broadcast the truth to every corner of the galaxy. The evidence of the Nightshade's true nature, and the conspiracy to hide it, began transmitting to every major information network. No amount of political power could bury this many facts, this much history. As alarms blared and confusion reigned, Thomas felt Shadow's satisfaction through their link. The truth was out. Now they just had to survive long enough to make sure it was heard. The ancient temple's central chamber hummed with power as Thomas and Shadow worked frantically at the control systems. Outside, they could hear Director Wells' forces regrouping, bringing in equipment shielded against nightshade energy pulses. "How long until the full transmission is complete?" Thomas asked, watching data streams flow across the holographic displays. Shadow's mental touch showed him a progress indicator. They were only halfway done. "Breach charges set," a voice echoed from outside. "Stand clear." Thomas and Shadow shared a quick glance. They had come too far to fail now. The truth about the Nightshades, their history, their civilization, their peaceful nature, had to reach the galaxy. The first explosion rocked the temple walls. Shadow immediately moved to reinforce the weakened section, using its natural energy-absorbing abilities to stabilize the structure. Through their mental link, Thomas felt Shadow's determination mixing with his own. "Director Wells," Thomas called out, activating the external communicators. "You might want to see what we're broadcasting before you blow this place up. Your name appears quite a few times in these records." The explosions paused. Thomas smiled grimly. He'd struck a nerve. "You're making a mistake. Reed." Wells' voice crackled through the comm. "The galaxy isn't ready for this knowledge. Think of the chaos it will cause." Shadow's mental touch carried images of its people emerging from hiding, of peaceful cooperation between species, of a future where fear no longer ruled. Thomas nodded in agreement. "The only mistake," Thomas replied, "was letting fear blind us for so long." Another explosion hit, larger this time. Dust rained from the ancient ceiling. But as the smoke cleared, something unexpected happened. Other nightshades began emerging from hidden chambers within the temple walls. Dozens of them. "Impossible," Wells breathed, his voice carrying over the still active comm. Shadow's joy flooded through the mental link. These were survivors, others of its kind who had guarded this place for generations, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The temple's defenses activated fully now, powered by the combined presence of so many nightshades. Holographic displays filled the chamber, broadcasting not just to the galaxy's networks, but directly into the minds of Wells' forces outside. They couldn't help but see the truth. Memories of nightshade healers saving plague-stricken worlds, of them negotiating peace between warring species, of their sacrifice in choosing exile over violence. "Stand down," Thomas heard one of Wells' soldiers say. "Sir, I can't be part of this anymore." More voices joined in, weapons being lowered as the truth reached them. The Nightshades were showing not just their history, but their hearts, their deep desire for peace and understanding. Wells wasn't finished, though. He charged into the temple himself, weapon raised. "Don't you see? We could control this power." "We cooled." He stopped mid-sentence as Shadow and the other Nightshades surrounded him, not with threats or violence, but with memories. They showed him the cost of fear, the price of prejudice, and offered forgiveness. Wells' weapon clattered to the floor. "All these years," he whispered, "we were so wrong." The transmission reached completion, spreading across every network in known space. Thomas watched as responses began flooding in: shock, disbelief, and gradually, understanding. Shadow touched Thomas's mind, showing him something new. A vision of the future. Nightshades emerging from hiding all across the galaxy, being welcomed rather than feared. Humans, with their unique ability to look past appearances, helping bridge the gap between species. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Thomas asked, looking at the gathered Nightshades. Their combined mental touch carried hope, gratitude, and determination. The ancient temple, once a place of hiding, had become a beacon of truth. As the binary sun set outside, casting long shadows through the temple windows, Thomas realized they had done more than clear the Nightshade's name. They had started a revolution of understanding. Shadow stood beside him, its form mighty yet gentle, a living testament to the power of looking past fear to find truth. Together, they had proven that the greatest strengths often come not from weapons or technology, but from the courage to trust and understand. The stand was over. The real work of bringing species together was about to begin. 6 months after the events at the ancient temple, Thomas stood before the newly formed Galactic Council. Beside him, Shadow towered over the assembled representatives, yet its presence now inspired awe rather than fear. The chamber, designed to accommodate beings of all species, was filled to capacity. The integration program has exceeded all expectations, Thomas reported, gesturing to the holographic data floating before them. Nightshades have successfully established diplomatic relations with 87 worlds so far. The council chamber's displays showed scenes from across the galaxy, nightshades helping to heal sick children on frontier worlds, their energy-absorbing abilities protecting ships from solar storms, their diplomatic skills resolving conflicts that had lasted generations. To think we nearly lost all of this to fear, the council leader said, shaking her head. Ranger Reed, your actions in bringing the truth to light will be remembered in history. Shadow's mental touch carried amusement at Thomas's embarrassment. Their bond had grown even stronger over the months, serving as a model for human nightshade partnerships across the galaxy. There's more, Thomas continued. The ancient records we uncovered are revealing technologies we never dreamed possible. The nightshade's understanding of energy and consciousness could revolutionize everything from space travel to medicine. A small commotion at the chamber's entrance drew their attention. Director Wells entered, now wearing the simple clothes of a researcher rather than his former military uniform. The changes in him reflected the larger changes in society. If I may speak, Wells said, his voice humble. I spent the past months working with the Nightshades, learning their true history. What we once feared as weapons, they had developed as tools for healing and protection. Their only crime was being different. Shadow moved forward, its massive form graceful despite the chamber's confines. Through their mental link, Thomas felt its desire to demonstrate something. The other council members watched in amazement as Shadow created a display of pure energy, showing the interconnected nature of all living things. This is what we were meant to be. Thomas translated Shadow's mental message. Not hunters, not weapons, but bridges between all forms of life. Humans were the first to see past our appearance to this truth. The council leaders stood. Then let us make it official. The Nightshades are hereby recognized as full members of the Galactic Alliance, with all rights and protections that entails. Furthermore, we establish the Human Nightshade Partnership Program as a model for future cooperation between species. Applause filled the chamber. Thomas felt Shadow's joy mixing with his own through their bond. But there was also determination. They both knew their work was far from over. Later, standing on the observation deck of the council station, Thomas and Shadow watched ships from dozens of worlds moving through space. Among them were the distinctive forms of Nightshade vessels, no longer hiding in the shadows, but flying proudly alongside their galactic neighbors. Remember when you were stuck under that beam in the research station? Thomas asked. Shadow's mental touch carried warmth and gratitude. Who would have thought that moment would change everything? New images flowed through their link, future possibilities, hopes for even greater understanding between species. Shadow showed him visions of hybrid cities where all beings could live together, of deep space expeditions combining the strengths of multiple species, of a galaxy united not by fear, but by cooperation. Yeah, Thomas agreed, we've only scratched the surface. A group of young diplomats in training passed by, representing a dozen different species. Among them were several humans and nightshades, already forming the kinds of bonds that Thomas and Shadow had pioneered. The galaxy was changing, growing, learning. The fear that had driven the nightshades into hiding was being replaced by understanding and hope. And it had all started with one human choosing to see past appearances, and one nightshade choosing to trust. As the stars shone before them, Thomas and Shadow stood together at the dawn of a new era. They had done more than change history. They had proven that the greatest strength lies not in dominating others, but in the courage to understand them. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities, and they would face it as they had faced everything else, together.